Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
And this is From Akron and Beyond. And welcome. We are looking forward to this particular segment of our show. It's a part two of a two-parter. We're talking about record stores and their sort of their role in the music world historically and currently, and if for the future. In part one, we had Scott Shepard of Time Traveler CDs, and he'd been around for like 45 years doing this business. And so it's interesting to hear his take on how things have changed. Today, our special guest is David Ignizio, who is the owner and proprietor of Square Records in Highland Square, one of the very most popular music stores in Akron, for sure. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bob.
Sure, you bet.
Good to see you and Nick here today.
Good.
Old buddies.
Good to have you here as well. And so I'm going to start off with a question which I've basically been asking everyone we've had on the show so far, which is a pretty basic one, but seems kind of important to me and interesting, which is basically, how did you originally actually get into music? I mean, not even the record store, but just like your motivation of your love of music.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. I guess like my family was not really big musical family. Like my parents had a couple records lying around the house, but mostly just sort of seemed like relics from when they were much younger. And the only ones like really stand out to me, you know, like they kept up with the times to the point where they bought the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. So you know, this was like.
There have been 18 million other.
Yeah. So that was there. There was maybe like a couple Elvis 45s, the James Taylor record, the Captain and Tennille, like, you know, pretty basic, just music in the broadest sense, you know, fine stuff. But so I think like my brother, who's 5 years older than me, was the one that really showed me the way. I was like mildly interested in things because I was born in the mid 70s, grew up in the early 80s and whatnot. So all the stuff that was going on then, Michael Jackson and, you know, the big pop music of the 80s, you know, was at least on my radar. So the first record I really remember buying was a Weird Al record, you know. So as a kid, that appealed to me, like him doing parody versions of a lot of the popular songs. And so I had that. I had Michael Jackson Thriller. I ended up getting the Styx album. I think it was Kilroy Was Here because I liked the robots, you know, that were on the cover.
Yeah.
So these are the reasons you get into music when you're a kid, I guess.
Sure.
And then like since my brother was older than me, by the time I was like 10, he was 15. He was very much into punk rock. He was into heavy metal. He was into even a little bit of like the hip hop that was going on, like sort of the underground music that was sort of bubbling up from the 80s and that was very relevant to him in, you know, 1985. And that stuff was coming out of his bedroom and I'm like, what the heck is this? This sounds a lot different than what I'm listening to. And so I got really interested in that and I would go into his room and start going through his records and just really, you know, be amazed at the things he had. And he kind of gave me an education in what was happening musically at that point, you know, at least in his life and his world, you know.
I think that can be a underrated aspect of young people getting into various music or various artistic scenes of any kind is the influence of a sibling. Now, I mean, I'm the oldest in my family, so I didn't have that. I don't know about you,
No,
Nick.
I'm an only child, but listening to some of the Ray Davies documentaries, Ray Davis, the Kinks, he talks about how influenced he was by his sisters' taste in music. You know?
Right,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, just, you know, you hear those stories of my sister's record collection or my, you know, whatever. But anyway, continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so like I said, my parents were kind of like checked out of music. We didn't even have any Beatles records in my household that I remember. Like I came really late to the Beatles. It took I don't know when I listened to my first Beatles record. I was probably 17 before I heard a Beatles album, you know. It's like because I was because my brother got me interested in like punk rock and heavy metal and stuff. So I was like, well, that's what I'm listening to. And then I got into like Public Enemy and, just hip hop. Like I was watching UMTV raps on MTV all the time. So these were the things that interested me. And then I found like a friend group that was interested in these things as well through middle school and high school,
Right.
And that sort of just carried on. So we kind of got more interested, I guess, in more like subculture or, niche-y kind of music. And then like I came to a lot of stuff that everybody grew up with a little later on in life. Like, it took me a really long time to like figure out that, because, in a way, like when you're into those kind of musics, you're standing in opposition to mainstream music or whatever.
Right.
So you're like, I don't need to hear the Beatles, well, I need to hear the Rolling Stones. Then when you grow up a little, you're like, oh crap, these records are really good, whatever. So then you have to like,
As opposed to us who rebelled against the disco era and the constant deluge from record labels of what we should have been listening to.
Yeah. Everyone's always trying to rebel against something, and then eventually you just realize like most of the stuff is really good anyway. It's like at this point, like I feel like there's this like misconception about record store guys that are like always judging you on your purchases or whatever, or like really gonna give you a sneer if you bring up the wrong record. It's like, what? It's all good. Like if you like it, I mean, outside of like something like Screwdriver or like racist, boy music or something, like it's fine, like if you like it, it's great. It's just we're all into different stuff at different points in our lives, and the journey is always interesting. So.
I think part of that judgmental stuff is youthful idealism coupled with youthful folly, I guess.
Sure.
I mean, my age. It's funny. I read a op-ed in the New York Times. Could I possibly be more pretentious? Last week, but I thought it was really interesting because it definitely applied to me. Which said it was this person that was born like in 1959, something like that, and he was saying that he always hated being considered part of the baby boomer generation because he says like with the baby boomers that starts in like 1946. And so it's like that's a pretty wide swath from 46 to I think it's 64 theoretically. And, he was, and I really identified with that because, he said that he considers himself part of the dazed and confused generation, like the Richard Linklater movie. And I get that, and he was saying like, listen, are you saying that the baby boomers are also like supposedly identified with American graffiti? Are you saying that like those were the same experiences, what it was like growing up with American graffiti, what it was like growing up in the mid 70s with, Led Zeppelin and Foghat or whatever. And that's definitely when I was growing up. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because I was into the music of that time. Then I got real bored with rock music in the early 70s. I got really into jazz. And then punk rock started. And then I got way into that. And in every one of these steps along my evolution, if you will, I was always totally judgmental about music. So, I mean, bands that I had really liked at one point, like King Crimson or Yes, stuff like that, all of a sudden I hated them. I professed that I hated them. They're terrible. They're pretentious. I was listening to The Clash. I'm listening to, Wire, bands like that. And
it's hard not to be judgmental in a way. I mean, I still feel guilty that I like Blue Cheer.
Oh, but I guess what I was getting at ultimately is, at this point in my life now, it's like I can be at a bar or a restaurant or something and hear a Hall & Oates song and be like, "That sounds pretty good." And I remember distinctly despising Hall & Oates at one point in my life. So it's just like, yes, you kind of come to it's just kind of like why be a hater of this stuff? You obviously have your taste, but
we were talking about ABBA last week, and it's just a perfect example of when they were popular. You don't want to admit that you love ABBA. Mm-hmm. They're geniuses.
They're great. Yeah, and like when you're younger, you're just trying to define yourself in so many ways, right. And you're using music as a crutch to do that a lot of ways. It's like a real simple way to do it because especially in school, when you're younger. One
thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was the three record stores that are here, that are real record stores that have been around for a long time. I was talking to Jared Wall, who opened Hollowbone Records, and all three of the existing record stores that been around for a while or have their own personality. Jared started in 2015. I mean, I thought it was just the other day, but he's been here for 8 years. And of course, we talked to Scott Shepard, and Time Traveler's been there 40 something years. How about you? When did you open?
We opened in 2003, in August of 2003, so we'll be coming up on 20
years.
Wow.
This year, yeah. So,
wow.
Yeah.
You're not the new guy in town anymore.
No. And yeah, I think there's a couple other shops that have opened in the area recently as well. So, yeah, there's, the more the merrier. But yeah, for us, it's been a good 20 years for sure, and things are continuing to go pretty well. And we're in Highland Square, which is the area we always wanted to be in, and really like our location there. So
I was talking to Bob on the way here today about the three long-term stores I just mentioned. They each has their own personality. Oh, Bob, talk a little bit about that. I actually went to Hollowbone, and it reminded me quite a bit of Quonset Hut.
The old Quonset Hut.
Yeah. Because they had there were like each one of these stores has their own personality. Hollowbone has a section for T-shirts, a section for posters, and vinyl. But you walk in there, and it's a pretty neat store, but it's totally different than Scott's store or Square Records.
I think that Time Traveler and Square Records have an overlap, but they kind of serve kind of different audiences a little bit to a degree. I mean, I think it's just, Akron's lucky to have that many record stores.
Absolutely.
You look at Cleveland, I mean, they're closing left and right.
That many good record stores.
Yeah, right. But you've moved us too far into the future, Nick. This is from Akron and beyond, and I don't want to go too far beyond yet. Let's get back to Dave's. He's been talking about his musical education. So at what point were you ever in bands or anything? Did you actually play out or in any way?
Yeah, kinda. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I had a few little high school bands. Me and my friends were in, and into my early 20s, we played here and there. Just like nothing special, nothing anyone would have remembered in any way, nothing notable. But we would play like a handful of shows, and then the membership somebody would leave and somebody else would join, and it'd be some new band, and it would just whatever. And then we all kind of like went to different colleges, and then when I was early 20s, 22, I think moved to Colorado.
Okay.
So I lived out there for a while, and then I've come back. Like since I've come back, I've played music with a few people, and as you know, I've played in an REM cover band recently.
Yes,
I was there.
Which is another early musical influence of mine. But I've mostly done vocals here and there, and tried to bang around on a guitar occasionally, but to no real.
Well,
avail.
You're decent, Michael's. I'll say that.
Yes. I heard that you do DJing also.
Yeah. In Colorado, I did do some DJing at a station out there, KGNU. I think they're still in existence. 2 to 5 in the morning, which is it's
prime time.
Yeah, and the new guys in town, so
you can hear our music.
Yeah. But it was freeform, and it was just like play whatever you want, and they had an extensive record collection, which was cool. So we would go digging around in there, pulling out records, and just bringing in. They would let us just bring in our own stuff and play it. Whatever was new, they had the new stuff. So and at that time, there's a handful of people listening. We would get calls from, somebody who's like finishing up a shift at the pizza shop and wanted to hear some Iron Maiden. So why not? Just we didn't play much Iron Maiden, but we'd play Iron Maiden because somebody was actually listening and wanted to hear it. And also, you could play an Iron Maiden song for 8 minutes and take care of some other business if you needed to. And then
DJ's secret weapon.
oh sure, yeah, like Inagata DeVita or whatever, right? But and then WRUW. I did some DJing there for about a year also when I lived in Cleveland, and then that's kind of that ended kind of coinciding with moving back to Akron and opening the shop in 2003.
So let's get to that. So what was the impetus for you deciding to open a record store in 2003?
Well, initially there was three of us, and it was my partner Juniper and my other partner Jeff. So the three of us had been friends for a long time, and we all kind of wanted to do something. We'd moved away, come back to the area, and we just kind of wanted to do something a little bit different, being back in town. Like, I don't know, like we'd all been other places in the country, seen, other record shops and things like that. So maybe we could do this here, There were, at that point, I think, Quonset Hut was around, which is a great shop, and there was all the exchanges and everything, but nobody was quite doing, I guess, the idea that we had, which was more like DIY focused, and we also wanted to have the space be available for events. In the early days of the shop, we did a lot of in-store events. We did art openings quite often.
Right.
Back then, we had like way fewer records in the shop, so there was all this space in the back of the store that was wide open for anything. Now it's kind of filled up, and it's harder to do events in there. But back then, we were very much ingrained with we moved into the Highland Square area, and that's like the big arts neighborhood in Akron. So it was no trouble like finding like all these people that had either art to display or like, hey, we've got this band, can we play here?
Right.
Remember going to a book signing there?
Yeah.
And also, what was that, Stitch and Bitch?
Yeah, that was an early thing that happened a lot. Yeah, the knitting group, the Stitch and Bitch knitting group. Yeah. So yeah, like that space was used very much for a lot of different things. And yeah, I kind of miss having that. I mean, I guess we could still sort of do that, but it's so
crowded as hell.
It's so crowded now in there, and it's like, there's so many records, and but that was very important to provide like a space for the community that's not just this business, trying to sell you things, but that you could be part of, and that sort of comes from all three of us, like being very. Just like kind of the music we were into at that time, which was like community oriented. Like a lot of us were very into like the Washington D.C. hardcore scene and Discord records, and that whole sort of philosophy of just making your art easily accessible, affordable, and like with something to say, and like having an importance in the community, and sort of standing for whatever values you had as a person, and things like that, not just being like a shop that just sets up and sells you some stuff, So
right.
that was something that was very important to all three of us at the time, for sure. And that was the main impetus really for starting it, and doing that. And we just met so many people because we'd been away from Akron for a long time, so we didn't know, we knew a few people, but, we just met so many people along the way from doing the shop. So it really just opened up a whole new world for us. And, we just got involved rather easily. And, I think we became a nice little hub for a lot of things that were happening for a while there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess it was just luck that there happened to be a space in Highland Square that opened up or was open at the time, because
we'd kind of been casing some spots, because we'd talked about doing the shop for a while, so we were keeping our eye on spaces. And then that one, I don't remember which one of us saw it, but one day we noticed it was available, and we called right away. There was a sign in the window with the number for our landlord, and we ended up looking at it the next day and more or less signed the lease. Like, I don't necessarily know if we were ready to open the shop at that point, but when the space like sped up the process quite a bit, because that's definitely where we wanted to be.
Sure, a lot of times you just have to jump in, right?
Yeah. So we didn't quite have enough. It's funny to look back. I have some old photos of the shop and what was in there at the time, and the amount of stock, which is 1/10 of what is in there now, and we were just throwing whatever we could in there, just bringing a lot of stuff from our personal collections into the store, just old cassettes, like whatever, anything people donated to us, any old stuff that we could put in there just to make it look a little more full.
Right.
And then eventually, we finished up the section in the back, and we had our friends do an art opening there, and that kind of set that off. And we've just kind of continued building it up from there. And every dollar we put into it, or that we get in, we put right back into the shop and try and just keep building it up to make it a respectable space, and to have a good variety of music and all that.
This is From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
And we are talking today with Dave Ignizio, the owner of Square Records in Highland Square, a great record store, which if you have not been there, I highly recommend you visit it because it's quite terrific. I was surprised. I guess I should have known this because I've been around. I was surprised that you're going on a 20th year of being open. And I'm thinking about the changes of your store over those years because, the performance space and the art and displays and what have you. I played there a few times even, but but when at one point the store was definitely, this is kind of getting into the business aspect of it now. So at one point the store, and I'm guessing here, but I would say it was probably 2/3 compact disc and a third vinyl and other stuff. And now it's completely flipped. The store seems to me like it's about 80% vinyl.
Yeah.
So tell me what it's been like experiencing that change and how that's affected your business.
It just happened. It sort of happens gradually. Just sort of by, I suppose, our shoppers' preferences to some degree, but also I'm a big vinyl fan, always have been. Everyone that was in the, influential in the beginning of the shop was as well. That was something from the beginning we wanted to do to kind of set ourselves apart as well because, like I said, there were some other shops in the area at the time when we opened, but nobody was really going deep into vinyl at all, or I guess in a way I would say like nobody was going deep into vinyl as if it were a living sort of media. Like
right.
A lot of people viewed it as like this relic of the past or whatever. Or there might be like a few shelves of vinyl, but it's all kind of oldies or whatever.
For nostalgia's sake only.
Yeah, or collectible or nostalgia or whatever.
Almost like a fetish object.
Yeah, right. And I can get into like the idea of collecting records too, or having like this. Whoa, look at this piece I've got that's older or whatever. That's great, but I also really like the idea that it continues to thrive. And it was, there were still people releasing records throughout, the dark ages of, the late 80s and 90s when everyone thought they'd gone away. You know? But, that was one of the things with like, there were some shops in Cleveland that were still stocking vinyl in those days. And we would drive up to Cleveland to go to, like, I think back then, mostly like Chris's Warped Records or like, Wax Stacks, Ultrasound Records. My Mind's Eye was one that opened in the late 90s as well.
That's still there, I think.
Yeah, My Mind's Eye still's going strong. So there were all these shops in Cleveland that were still doing it, and that was like sort of coincided with a lot of what we were into at the time, which was a lot of punk rock and independent music. Like those were the labels that were still keeping it alive, and also hip hop. Putting out like a lot of 12-inch hip-hop records and stuff. So those were kind of the things that were keeping pressing plants in operation through those years. A lot of them were shutting down, and but there were still new records being made. And oddly enough, back then, like one of the reasons I was really stoked about vinyl was it was cheaper than the CD, which now is not the case, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but
like totally flipped.
Yeah, you could buy a new record back then for like $8. It's like, oh, the CD is $11, but this record is $8. And so I started getting into vinyl because, sort of like it appealed to me because a lot of the bands I liked were putting out records and it was cheaper. And I just, I had a few records left over from when I was a kid. So I was like, oh, why don't I keep keep this little collection going, So I got back into it then. We wanted that to be a big, important part of what the shop was when we reopened, because we knew there was still, demand for it. It just, there weren't that many people selling it in the store environments, and definitely not around Akron area. So, that was an important part of it. And then over the years, from 2003 to now, it's like, you would see CDs gradually losing importance, and streaming coming along and all that stuff, which that already existed in 2003 to some extent, digital music,
right?
But the real spike in vinyl sales kind of starting to rise, like, I don't know, maybe 10, 11 years ago, like really seeing like, oh, this is getting like way bigger than it was, like it was kind of incrementally growing for us even every year from 2003 up, but then we would see like big jumps here and there, and then like kind of plateau again, and then another big jump. So it kind of, it is interesting, and it's great. Like, I mean, honestly, it's kind of how I always wanted the shop to be. I had nothing against CDs, but I kind of, at one point when we were talking about starting the shop, wanted it to be nothing but a vinyl shop. But I like CDs as a medium too, and I like having them in the shop still. I still have a few. I'll never get rid of them entirely, but vinyl's definitely taken over, and it's something I don't know if anyone could have ever seen coming to this extent, how popular it is and how mainstream popular it is, but
it keeps growing every year.
It seems to, yeah. I mean, I keep, the pessimist in me just keeps thinking, well, this is going to plateau, and or this is, the bottom's going to fall out of this at some point. But right now, I don't know, it just keeps kind of increasing in popularity, and we see just new people coming all the time. After people, young kids getting turntables for Christmas, and getting their first records. Almost every week somebody comes in and is like, "This is my son or daughter's first record," and they're really young and they're getting into it, and it's cool to see, and they get really excited about it, and so I hope that continues.
Yeah, it seems to me, a question I've been wanting to ask you about this is, it seems to me that the biggest challenge for the future of vinyl there's two things. One is exactly what you said, how expensive it's become. I mean, albums now, vinyl albums are really pricey. Yeah. And then the question of, are there enough pressing plants really out there now? I mean, like who is going, other than Jack White, who's going to put money into building a new vinyl factory at this point? It seems like it would be a precarious investment because it is literally a factory. I mean, you're dealing with, big machinery and pollutants and things that are all part of it. Yeah. And I'm not trying to be a naysayer here. I mean, but I just, you and I both know people that are local artists who have want to put out their recordings on vinyl, and they're having to wait for a year, 2 years, even sometimes more, to get their record pressed because Taylor Swift has a new album, and now she's going to come out with another one, and everyone's going to want those, her album on vinyl. Yeah. So I wonder about your thoughts there.
Yeah, where there's like 76 King Gizzard records that have to come out in the next year. Before.
About 3.5 years ago, when the Bizarros were putting out a vinyl record from Akron 2 with the Bad Dudes, it was a 2-album set, and we had it pressed in Cleveland, and we had to wait for Alice Cooper's album to be finished, and then we were next in line,
I mean, there's always something in line. I think it's gotten a little better now. Like, obviously, like almost every industry, COVID sort of threw a wrench in, production, and getting supplies, but you're dealing with, I honestly don't know how many pressing plants exist in the country right now. I think it's, less than 20. There is one in Cleveland, Got a Groove, and I know from what I understand, they're operating 24/7 basically. They're just churning them out as fast as they can, which in some ways it's like, well, it's like you're churning them out as fast as you can. Like, you got to have quality control on top of that. There's so much that goes into it. Right. There's a new pressing plant that opened in Colorado. I believe it might already be operating now. The Vinyl Me Please people, they've started a plant there. And Jack White's plant. a lot of these plants are operating with the old equipment that, is very, I mean, just the machines themselves are, they're from the 80s or whatever, a lot of them, and
Jack White's are probably from the 50s.
He I guess is using some new process, that he's got kind of a one-of-a-kind plant, which is interesting, and you can go up to Detroit and watch them making the records. But and I think the Vinyl Me Please plant uses a similar process, so it's happening. And what really needs to happen, and I think Jack White mentioned this last year, was that the major labels need to invest in this now. Because they are reaping some of the rewards here, and they are the ones that a lot of times are causing some of the delays with major artists pressing so much. It was unheard of for any artist to be pressing 500,000 or close to 1 million copies of a record a few years ago.
Sure,
but now that is happening. So they're farming. Major labels are farming out orders of 1 million records to these smaller pressing plants that are used to pressing up like 30,000 Pavement records or whatever. I don't know.
Right.
So that would be a huge order, like to do something like that, like 30,000. But now it's exponentially larger, and so it's all going to cause bottlenecks and everything, and all these. The younger bands that just want to get we just want to get 300 copies of our record out and sell them at shows, and that was what was sustaining that industry for a long time. Like I said, like in the 90s, there were all sorts of bands that were just, pressing these records on their own, sometimes without a label, just so they could have them for their friends or to sell at their shows when they went on small tours across the country or whatever. So it is a problem, and hopefully there'll be more people that are, taking at this point, I feel like it's a safer risk. We've got the data that shows like the years of increasing vinyl sales. So,
right.
Hopefully somebody that has the means can open more plants. I would hope the major labels would take the reins on that. But the music industry's hurting as much as a lot of industries are. It's tough. But whoever's motivated to do it will do it. Hopefully, and. I think if there are more pressing plants in existence, perhaps, that will ease the pricing a little bit too. I don't know.
Right.
I'm not sure all the aspects that go into the pricing, because, it's something that baffles me. A lot of times you'll look at 2 records you get in from 2 different sources, 2 different record labels, putting out a record on that day, say it's just a single LP in a regular sleeve with a non-printed inner sleeve, and one will be $25 and one will be $18, or
and then there'll be Neil Young's, which is $40.
Well, right, and sometimes it's very obvious why something's more expensive, because there's like really unique packaging, or like they might have
bonus tracks,
bonus stuff, double LP, maybe it's pressed at audiophile vinyl, whatever,
right.
Whatever that sort of stuff, whatever you believe in, with your, audiophile world, whatever,
right.
If that stuff really sounds better, who knows? But, there is at least some reason you can say like, okay, that costs a little more than that. And sometimes you just look at this thing and like, well, this is the same as that. It looks like they went through the same process, but this is, $10 more. I don't know. And,
right.
And as a shop owner, I honestly don't know why. And I can't, people ask me that at the shop, it's like, I don't know. It's they decided that one's more.
Right.
And, sometimes it has to do with, and the other weird thing is so if you're pressing 1 million copies of a record, your costs per unit are much cheaper. It's obviously you're pressing 1 million, so that's
right.
You're spending a lot. But, if you put an order into a pressing plant for only 300 or 500 records, they're going to charge you a little bit more per record because you're not pressing that much. So, theoretically, it should be cheaper if you're pressing way more copies, but it's not always the case. So.
Right.
And there's a lot of unknowns and non-transparency when it comes to that side of the business.
This is From Akron and Beyond. I am Bob Ethington with my co-host Nick Nicholas, and our special guest today is Dave Ignizio, from the owner of Square Records in Highland Square here in Akron. I wanted to ask you a couple other quick questions here, and I'm sure Nick has some for you as well. But Record Store Day.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there used to be one, then there were two. Now there's, I can't keep count.
How many are there?
It's kind of back to two now.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing where the COVID situation just put everything a little out of whack. So we do have the April Record Store Day coming up. That's April 22nd this year. And then the November Record Store Day, which they call Record Store Day Black Friday. So it's always the Friday after Thanksgiving. So those are the two main ones. And in the past, since 2020, they had to fudge things around and add a bunch of other dates because of COVID and because things were getting delayed. So like I think last year it might have been down to 2 dates. The year before it ended up being like 3 different dates. It was like, I can't remember exactly, but it was like April, June, and August, and then they did the November one also. So it felt like a lot.
Yeah.
But they just couldn't get the records pressed in time. It was just, it was just like one of those COVID production delay things. So rather than trying to just get out what they could and just do the 1 April thing, they were like, well, we'll stagger them a little bit, and hopefully everything will be here in time. But now it's as far as I know, this year it's going to be back as it was to just the April as the main Record Store Day. And then Black Friday.
Do people actually line up before you open up?
Oh, sure, yeah. That's kind of been a staple. Some years the line can be as much as like 100 people out there waiting to get in. Yeah, it just depends. The demand for certain records it can be really high. Some years more than others, but like we would have people lining up. Like one year, I was working the night before till about midnight to get everything ready for the next day. And as I was leaving, there were already like 4 people lined up for the next day because they had to get the specific record. So they were going to make sure, that they got it, and they did. But you just put a couple camping chairs out and brought a thermos of whatever, and hung out in the craziness of the Highland Square. Evening.
They were devoted.
Morning. Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, COVID probably affected things to a degree, but I mean, I know that Square Records in particular in Akron has been legendary for the Record Store Days. I mean, and the lines
we've done
just
them all,
going down the block and stuff. So
I think this is like the
17th
or 18th year of Record Store Day. And the first one was very different, and it was just like, I don't even think there were any actual releases the first year.
Yeah.
It was just like this concept of it's Record Store Day, and I think some of the labels sent us some free, posters and stickers and grab bags. There might have been a couple of 45s that they said, hey, hand these out to your customers. So it's really changed a lot over the years to what it is now, where there's upward. Well, this year I think there's about 300 releases coming out for Record Store Day.
Wow.
Oh, man.
But that's, I think, down from even where it was a few years ago, because it was around 450, close to 500, which gets a little unmanageable sometimes, and you have to kind of pick and choose what you want to carry as a shop owner, like
right.
What fits and in your shop. But yeah, it's a lot of stuff to sort through. But
I never asked anybody this question. Do different genres participate? Like, do jazz labels do the same?
Yeah, there are some jazz releases. The jazz releases actually are always pretty popular for Record Store Day because they're usually like kind of either like alternative takes from like classic jazz records or whatever. So it might be, just like, in the jazz sessions, they're always recording like multiple takes, and whatever goes on the record is the record. But then, this stuff's great too, so let's put this out, because it's, still the same guys. So those records always do well. Almost, really almost every genre's represented, it really runs the gamut, just about everything's out there, for Record Store Day. Even like children's records and stuff. There's like a Peppa Pig record for Record Store Day.
Picture discs, huh?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you're just like, I don't know why this is a thing, but it's a thing, So, everyone gets in on the action. So, yeah.
It seems like every Record Store Day, there's a Miles Davis release and there's a Sun Ra release.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, those are two of the most prolific artists.
Right. And in Sun Ra's case, there's like hundreds of things that, were not even really available for years. So, it's
on the Saturn label.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Saturn Research. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a Miles release this year. I don't think there's a Sun Ra, though. I think this might be one of the few years. I might be wrong on that, but I don't think there's a Sun Ra this year.
So, other question I have for you is, what are you listening to now that you're really into, be it new or old stuff?
Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of, actually, like you mentioned jazz. Like I have been listening to a lot of jazz lately. A lot of there's a label called International Artists that I really like. That's a jazz label, the current jazz label. There's artist Micaiah McCraven on there that put out a record earlier this year that I really like. Another artist named Jeff Parker, who's been around for a long time. He actually used to play with Tortoise as their guitarist.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And has been releasing solo records on his own for a while, and he's put out a couple on that label that I've really liked. I still listen to a lot of that. I listen to a lot of that, modern jazz, modern sort of like ambient music. I've definitely mellowed out in like what I listen to, but I still like a lot of like rock stuff, and I'll try and keep up, on the newer, like kind of, there's a band called Proto Martyr that I really love that's got 4 or 5 records out. They're on Domino Records. They're a band from Detroit that just kind of has some ways sort of a classic sound, but feels there's some sort of cross between like Joy Division meets The Fall kind of thing. They're really great. It just never ends. You're always confronted with new music, and you get promos all from the labels here and there, and there's always something new that kind of gets my interest. But I kind of fall within those parameters, I guess, a lot. Just listening to, and then go back and people are always trading in records to the shop that I've never seen before. And, and just like constantly learning about music from 30, 40 years ago that I've never heard. So
would you say that? This is a kind of a random question, but you have a large stock of used records that you've bought or people have traded in, and then of course you have your large collection of new vinyl that has been, even if it's older albums, it's newly pressed and what have you. Do the same people buy stuff from both of those areas, or are there some people that come in and all they want is used stuff and they don't even want anything new, or vice versa? I'm just curious.
It depends. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly people that are very hyper focused on, their specific thing, whatever it may be, there's people that very definitely, like, for them, like the experience of listening to music, that was something that they're not going to listen to anything that came out after, say, like their senior year of high school or whatever, more or less, like that's it. That's, that's what they remember. And, that gives, whatever memories they have of that, that's great for them. They're not interested in new music, and that's fine. There's people that are only interested in new music and that will not go back and, shop the used section at all. They're just like always looking for whatever the newest thing is. And then, I have plenty of people that come in and will go through everything and then are just sort of omnivorous, like music freaks, like.
Sounds like me.
Yeah. Right. And there's plenty of those people. And I think that's like something that our shop does well, is that I will bring in anything. Like I don't turn away a lot of records, I may not know what it is, but if it, I'll bring it in and put it out there. I like to just have everything represented in there. I don't want to be super hyper focused on one specific genre. I have my particular things that I really like more than anything else, but and that may be like one of the things when we first opened the shop, that we really wanted to focus on a type of music or whatever. But through the years, I think it just became obvious that we should carry all of this stuff and make this, a shop that everyone can really enjoy. So
Right. Well, this has been From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington with my co-host Nick Nicholas, and our guest today has been David Ignizio from Square Records. He's owner and proprietor. I like using that word, so I keep using proprietor. And thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next week.
Just give me any